I am Barbara Elder-Weller, the School Engagement Advisor for the NJIT Center for Pre-College Programs. Before I move on, I want you to know that there are two people behind the scenes who deserve special credit. Ms. Martha Churchill, the assistant to the executive director, has made all of the arrangements for today. Martha is a real jewel, and we're very fortunate to have her as a colleague. And Ms. Suzanne Berliner-Heyman helped enormously before the session started today and during the session in making everything run smoothly. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jacqueline L. Cusack, the Executive Director of the NJIT Center for Pre-College Programs. Prior to joining NJIT, Dr. Cusack was a long and faithful and distinguished public school servant as a music teacher, a principal, an assistant superintendent, a superintendent of schools, and acting assistant commissioner of education for the New Jersey Department of Education. Since coming to the center, Dr. Cusack has supported the expansion of a number of programs and the creation of new programs, including this forum, and with Dr. Burr Alexander, the highly successful NJIT Newark Mathematics Success Initiative. Dr. Cusack.
Thank you for your leadership in planning and organizing the STEM Forum again this year. A very special welcome to my public and private K-12 colleagues. We have a wonderful variety of representatives from the field, superintendents, STEM directors, STEAM supervisors, principals, directors of science, math, and robotics. And thank you to our NJIT senior staff, including Dean Belfield from the College of Science and Liberal Arts, Dean Hamilton from the Albert Dorman Honors College, Dean Combs from the Newark College of Engineering, Dean Tuchel from the Martin Tuchman School of Management, and Dr. Laurent Stangen, Vice Provost for Undergraduate Studies. I also want to acknowledge the participation of members of the Center's Advisory Board, including Dr. Simon and Vice Chair Dr. Frank Alvarez and Ken Myers. I'm very pleased to introduce someone who has championed pre-college STEM education and advocated for the Center for Pre-College Programs throughout his tenure at NJIT. He understands the importance of helping students acquire the requisite skills to solve complex problems in our world, in part through fluency in STEM subject areas. That's our president, Dr. Joel Bloom. Joel?
Thank you, Jackie. And let me first and foremost thank Dr. Cusack. You heard and thank Barbara Weller, Dr. Weller. In her introduction to Jackie, she referred to her as the acting assistant commissioner at one time for the Department of Education here in the state of New Jersey. She was acting when I left that position, and in her short period did a much better job in her acting position than I did while appointed to the position. And when I had the opportunity to come to NJIT and to take a look at our Center for Pre-College Education, which has been critical to this university. That center is critical to this university. As some of you know, we are very often ranked in the top 20 among universities in this country for graduating African American young men and women with baccalaureates in engineering. Many of them, a couple hundred a year, come to the freshman class of NJIT, underrepresented women and minorities, through the Center for Pre-College Education. So when having the opportunity upon the retirement of a very important person, Dr. Howard Kimmel, I sought Jackie out to please consider leading the center, and she has done a magnificent job along with her colleagues in doing that. Before I make some further prepared comments, I have to say hello to a dear, dear friend, Dr. Harris. Dr. Harris, you and I look the same as when we met, I don't know, 20 years ago. Of course, along with age, our eyesight goes as well. I'll stop at that point. Welcome, Bernie. Good to see you. Great. Dr. Harris has been a staunch advocate for what we're going to be talking about today. So it's just amazing how long you've really led this fight for underrepresented. And you got it right when you said we have to start at the elementary school. You had it absolutely right. And that's been what you've been working on for decades now. So thank you, Dr. Harris. The other very senior colleague that I will acknowledge, please, all of you are very important people, but Nadia Makar, who's also I see here with us. We also go back a couple decades. Literally turned an urban high school, an urban school district, into producing some of the best students, STEM students, in the state of New Jersey. Many of them are here at NJIT based on your work, Nadia, and I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to make some comments, and many of them wind up in our Albert Dorman Honors College. So Nadia, thank you for your decades also of work in this field. So let me just use that by way of making some very, very brief comments. I mentioned about NJIT's reputation and ranking, particularly for minority and underrepresented women in the STEM professions. But whatever we've done, we have to redouble our effort. And the idea of reimagining, I love the title, Reimagining 21st Century STEM Education. That's exactly what we need to do. While we've done okay, we have not done well. Just look at the data. Engineering profession today has only 13% women in it. Only 13% women in engineering education. Women in this country occupy greater than 55% of the slots on American university campuses. So how in a country that is driven by technology, do we have only 13% women represented? And if you think that is bad, look at the representation in engineering and in the STEM professions of our African American and Hispanic students. It is the percents there, again, are not good. In the case of women, while about 30% of women enter the engineering profession, too many of them leave. So that has to do with what's going on in the profession. Similarly, we see not the same exodus of the profession, but similarly, there is an exit of the profession from underrepresented minorities. So we are trying to redouble our effort here. And the effort here at NJIT is grades 4 through 12. Because as Bernie Harris told many of us a couple decades ago, it's too late only to work in the high school. We must work in grades prior to the high school, in elementary school. And having served in K-12 education and now in higher education and still spending a lot of time in K-12, in fact, Jackie and I share, Dr. Cusack and I share an alma mater, Teachers College. I'll be in their academic festival later today, talking about the continuing need to introduce STEM education early in elementary schools, which we do, but not by the professionals who know STEM education, science teachers and math teachers. With all due respect to any of my colleagues here who came through the humanities, social sciences curriculum, if they are in the classroom today, too often in the elementary school, we have expert teachers of reading, some of the best. And New Jersey in particular does very well academically when compared nationally. But we still don't have teachers of mathematics and teachers of science in the upper elementary school grades and in the middle school grades. And I'm going to talk a little about a successful project that Jackie already referred to called MSI that we're working with Dean Belfield on. If you look at too many of our urban high schools and you try to identify who is truly a well-prepared teacher of mathematics in our urban high schools, and I'll get to why this is so critically important in a moment. As we've learned from MSI, but we knew this even before that, too many of the people teaching in our urban high schools, teaching math curriculum, are not necessarily math teachers. Why? Because there aren't enough math teachers. There are not enough STEM professionals. There aren't enough STEM professionals of diverse backgrounds, but in general, for K-12 education, for higher education, and business and industry. If you look today, students leaving NJIT, students with their STEM credentials leaving NJIT have 3 and 4 job offers. Many of them with 6-figure salaries. These are baccalaureate students. Why? Because demand for STEM professionals exceeds the supply. And if you think about all the ramifications of that problem, take a current crisis that we've got too many of them, whether it's economic, whether it's pandemic, whether it's social injustice. We just do not have the diversity or the supply of people to help us solve, manage those kinds of crises. So we must produce more STEM professionals. We must do it through reimagining math and science education in elementary schools, in middle schools, and in high schools. And we can only reimagine it with professionals and diverse professionals at the table in those discussions. As we look at enrolling students at NJIT, and we are a very proud, diverse university, not diverse enough, we're working on that. I just left a couple-hour meeting on that discussion with something called our Board of Overseers. If you look at the future of the college-age population in this country, the minority population in this country is approaching the majority age group for college going, 16 to 24-year-olds. So the minority population is going to become the majority population on our campuses going forward. There's 2 things we know. The vast majority of minority students still come from those urban high schools that I've talked about, notwithstanding Nadia Memorial High School, please. And economically, we're going to see larger numbers of low-income students on our college campuses, regardless of what the disciplines are. So we also have to imagine, we're doing that at NJIT as we speak. NJIT awards about $30 million a year in financial aid out of our budget, forgetting what the students bring for STEM and in the state for Pell Grants, rather federal grants. what they bring in the state of New Jersey, something called TAG, or I see Ozzy here, EOF funding, right? Regardless of that, we still award 30 million. Well, we've got to what we're reimagining, though, is more for financial need as compared to academic performance. We'd love to do both at 100%. We can't do that, and therefore we do need to reconfigure some of our need-based aid, anticipating the next cohort of college-age students. We know the people who got hurt the most in this pandemic, in this economic downturn, are low-income families. And that's the future student yet that's queuing up to come to our colleges and universities. So we've got to reimagine our financial aid. We've got to continue to grow our pre-college program. We need to do more. We need to recruit more diverse students. We need to recruit a more diverse faculty on our campus, which we are working at. So MSI, the Math Success Initiative, which I think is going very well. I happen to be on a WebEx in front of business people with the superintendent of schools yesterday, Roger Leone. He raved about this program to business people here in the city of Newark. MSI grew out of a arm wrestle that the mayor, Ras Baraka, and I had 20 years ago, when he was the principal of Central High. I will not tell you the whole story other than to say, he calls me up one day from NJIT, invites me to Central High School, which was just a walking block away, and said to me, you need to recruit more students from Central High to NJIT. I said, fine, Ross, how are we going to do that? Problem is they're not prepared. They're not prepared mathematically. It has nothing to do with the color of their skin or their economic background. You are not giving them pre-calculus. They can't come to NJIT. I can't do remediation. So send them to county college, we'll work that way. But let's work with, and for years, our Center for Pre-College Education taught after school students from Central High. And we went from 0 students coming to NJIT to about 7 a year for several years, until he tried to fool me by making the football team the next class of students to recruit. That's a long story. It's a good one, but I won't tell it now. Ras Baraka is the mayor today. He and I continue to be friends. About 3 years ago, we started the discussion about, we have about 300 of our 9,000 undergraduate students, 300 from the city of Newark. He said, we have to increase that. I said, how are we going to do it, Roz? And he said, let's form a partnership. You, me, superintendent. Obviously, we included Jackie, we included Kevin Belfield. Kevin is our dean of CSLA, where our Department of Mathematics is, because math is the language of STEM. And if the students do not have a strong math background, we know Moshe Kam cannot put them into his engineering classes. We know that. Or Oya Turkel, our dean of the Tuckman School of Management, can't put them into her probability and statistics classes or some of her business analytic classes. So it's about math. What we agreed to is we would work on doubling the number over 4 years. We would bring money, we would bring faculty, we would bring students that we would put into NJIT. We'd put them, whether it's an EOF program or elsewhere, we would give them the support they need. We want to continue to improve the graduation rate. It's not enough to recruit. We must graduate these students. So we're doing that. And here's what the superintendent said yesterday in another WebEx with a couple hundred business people on. This program is a success. So we now have 2 classes of students as freshmen and sophomores, who came through MSI, who would not have been here. Not only that, the mayor watches carefully what we do here. He says, hey, you started this honors college, right? Albert Doman Honors College. I know the dean, I believe the dean is on here as well. He said, how about some of these students get into that honors college, the Albert Doman Honors College? And I said, okay, but here's the criteria, honors courses, right? He said, I'll tell you what, you work with put these students again in your center. What they don't get in the newer public schools, they get into the Center for Pre-College Education through the after-school and summer programs. That's where they are getting the full education they need to come to NJIT. We now have awarded for 2 years in a row to 3 African-American females last year, 3 African-American males this year, honors follows full ride scholarships to Lewis Hamilton's Albert Doman Honors College. These are outstanding students who would not have come to NJIT. Of the 6 of them, I've spoken to all of them, 1 or 2 of them probably wouldn't even necessarily been thinking about STEM or a polytechnic university, if not for that opportunity. These are 6 Newark students who could have gone anywhere in the country based on their credentials. And they're here in Newark at NJIT. So I thank all of you for your effort, for your interest, for your hard work, for your commitment. There's a word I started to use, which I just find seems to sum it all up: intentional. We must act with intention beyond the conviction that we all have. We must act and take action and be intentional about improving STEM education, reimagining it, K through 12 in higher education. And we must be able to produce the population that this country needs, not only for its economics, but for its safe and its healthy environment. And nobody are better taxpayers than STEM educated people. I've done the research on that. So please join us, work with us. For those of you who are in K-12, please continue, whether it's this Polytech or others, but we must redouble our effort to go beyond 10 or 12% of the young men and women who are graduating from high school today interested in STEM. It needs to get to 30, 40, 50% of the young men and women coming out of our high schools. I thank you for listening. I thank you, Dr. Cusack, Dr. Harris, Nadja, outstanding seeing you folks again. And I will stop and listen for a while. I've got another one of these WebExes to do. As I said, our alma mater is having an academic festival, Jackie, and they've invited presidents who've come through Teachers College to speak at it. Same speech. I don't even have to rewrite the speech. Thank you.
I'm sure you'll represent us quite well, Dr. Bloom. Thank you so much. Can you tell that he's a believer? That's why we're able to sponsor these kinds of events, because we're surrounded by believers in this community. I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker. Let me tell you a little bit about him. As Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Harris leads the National Math and Science Initiative, NMSI's, efforts to improve teacher effectiveness and student achievement in STEM education across the country. He's been involved in math and science education for more than 25 years through the Harris Institute and Foundation, and as a founding member of NMSI. Prior to NMSI, Dr. Harris was CEO and managing partner of Vesalius Ventures Incorporated. It's a venture capital firm that invests in early to mid-stage healthcare technologies and companies. As CEO, he was responsible for managing a portfolio of operating companies and venture investment. While at NASA, Dr. Harris conducted research in musculoskeletal physiology and clinical investigations of space adaptation and developed in-flight medical devices to extend astronaut stays in space. A veteran astronaut for over 25 years, he's logged more than 438 hours and traveled over 7.2 million miles in space. and was the first African American to walk in space. Dr. Harris is a member of the board of directors for U.S. Physical Therapy, JSA Health, and Monabo Technologies. He serves as a trustee for Salient Fund and Salient MF Trust and Barings Fund and Trust. In addition, he's on the board of the National Academy of Medicine, the Texas Medical Center, Health Connect, NEMSI, and the Harris Institute and Foundation. Dr. Harris earned his Bachelor's of Science in Biology from the University of Houston, a Master's of Medical Science from the University of Texas, Medical Branch at Galveston, a Master of Business Administration from the University of Houston, and a Doctorate of Medicine from Texas Tech University School of Medicine. He completed a residency in internal medicine at the Mayo Clinic, a National Research Council Fellowship in Endocrinology at the NASA Ames Research Center, and trained as a flight surgeon at the Aerospace School of Medicine, Brooks Air Force Base. He's also a licensed private pilot and certified scuba diver. Dr. Harris is the recipient of numerous awards, including honorary doctorates from Stony Brook University, Morehouse School of Medicine, NJIT, Washington and Jefferson College, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, University of Hartford, and Indiana Institute of Technology. He's also been awarded the NASA Space Flight Medal, the NASA Award of Merit, and is a fellow of the American College of Physicians and recipient of the 2000 Horatio Alger Award. He's the author of Dreamwalker, A Journey of Achievement and Inspiration. He's our guest, one of our heroes, Dr. Bernard Harris. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Harris, for this conversation. I want to begin by just sharing that something we all know, it's a popular expression that problems are characterized as opportunities in workflows. So if we think about the spring and this school year as having been seriously problematic, we should also think about these experiences as being an opportunity to reimagine what teaching and learning in STEM education can and should be. I mean, someday we're going to emerge from this new normal and never go back. But I want to talk with you about what you see as possibilities in STEM education as we move forward. Now, you often refer to your mission as being a terrestrial mission regarding math and science education. Would you tell us a little more about that?
Well, first of all, Jackie, thank you for that great introduction and your friendship through the years. Dr. Bloom, Joel, you never change, man. We're not changing at all. We're just getting better. Before Jackie mentioned my honorary doctorate degree, I was going to say that, you know, when I have an opportunity to come and speak to this group, I feel like I'm coming home because I have an honorary doctorate degree from here. I have been working with NJIT for many years through the foundation work and the fantastic work that this university does in reaching the communities that are surrounding you and the surrounding state there, particularly underrepresented students, I think is an important job that not many universities do it as well as NJIT. So kudos to all of you and keep up the good work. In regards to your question, Jackie, indeed, I always joke when I'm giving talks is that I had an extraterrestrial mission where my job was to ensure that astronauts stay healthy while they're in space, and was involved in a lot of activities around that in the medical field. And then just serving simply as an astronaut who takes orders from his boss on Earth and says, you know, go out and explore out there. And, you know, being in space allows me to have a view that's a little bit different, I think, than a lot of folks here on Earth. But I think it is akin as many of you might have heard me said, to the view that I think that God has of us here on this planet. It gives you a view that changes your perspective about what we need to do on this planet and the effort that we need to do to drive our economies, to drive our humanity, to take care of this precious thing called planet Earth. And part of that, as you've already alluded to in my mission, is to ensure that individuals, particularly students and communities, have equal opportunities no matter where they are. And it really is particularly relevant here in the United States when we are suffering from two pandemics, as been described by many. One, of course, of COVID, and the other, of course, is the issues around racial injustice in this country. And so when I think about that, that is certainly my terrestrial mission now. And that mission is to ensure that individuals and communities have a stake and can fulfill their dreams no matter what their dreams are. And just like Dr. Bloom had mentioned, I think at the heart of that, of being able to enable is education. And in this day and age, in the 21st century, technology drives everything that we do. And if we are not cognizant of that, and if we are not planning for that, then we all lose, not just the communities in which we all serve, but the whole nation loses. So it really is of paramount importance that we have discussions like this, but not just talk about it, but create programs and opportunities to enable those who are important in this country, and that is those who are economically disadvantaged. One last thing I'll say in regards to what Dr. Bloom had mentioned is that we are in changing times. I used to say in the 20th century that in the 21st century, two things were going to happen. One was the impact of technology on our lives, and the other was the shift in demographics in this country. And now we're in the 21st century where all of that is in front of us, in our face, every day. And so we have to take that into account as we create our programs, as we look at solutions, as we look at, Jackie, as what you just mentioned, the opportunity in education.
Dr. Harris, we all know that STEM fields represent an important and a critical source of employment. And I want us to talk a little more about the implications of that STEM preparation for the world of work and its implications for the K-12 environment. You know, after Sputnik, we did a lot of work in this country to improve math education. Remember how Admiral Rickover figured significantly in changing curriculum at the high school level. But we did little to nothing when it came to engineering education. If we reflect back on the movement years back in public schools where we brought computers into our buildings, well, what did we do? We retrofitted classrooms. We had a room set aside with lots of computers, and we took cohorts of students certain times during the day to that room. Tinkering around the edges is my point, is how we typically respond. So what do we need to do to drive this more deeply into systemic instruction, the systemic way of thinking about teaching and learning? How do we do that? And what are the implications for teacher education and for bringing parents along into this? I mean, it's not tinkering that we should be thinking about, clearly. It's more substantive. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Sputnik. the United States that really got us off our seats of our pants. I'll put it that way, to get moving around the importance of engineering and technology education in order to catch up with the Russians and eventually surpass them. So I think we're in a Sputnik moment now, and that moment has to deal with what's happening to our school systems as a result of COVID, where we're, because of so many unknowns and so many uncertainties, that this is changing the way in which we are delivering our education and how we teach our students. It is forcing us to rely on technology like we have never relied on it before. And I'm sure in this group that's gathered, we can argue about the impact of that, whether that has been positive or negative, in terms of the online curriculum that's available and its ability to provide the same level of education that you get face-to-face. I, for one, would say no at the moment, because we were so far behind, as Jackie, as you just mentioned. It's almost like when we talked about online learning in the past, it was like one of these things that you actually don't talk about very much. And we thought that it would take away from teaching. I think now we have an opportunity to really look at how can we integrate technology solutions that are being implemented now sort of piecemeal and sort of in a catch-up mode, to truly integrate that into how we teach our students. And in doing so, we're able to not only be more effective or do more effective face-to-face teaching when this is all over, but be able to use those elements of technology that enhance the teaching. And I would say that it would also allow us to reach into communities that we haven't been able to reach into before. And then the last thing I will say, I think for the most part, many people feel like we're going to spend this year figuring out how to educate. We're going to spend next year trying to correct those things that we didn't get accomplished with our students. And so we're going to have to come up with ways in which to get them back up to on level. And after that happens, then we need to relook at education. And I think we need to relook at it with this notion of how can we more effectively use technology in how we teach.
So then, apropos of using technology more effectively, Dr. Harris, clearly we've all experienced the haves and the have-nots in this country over any number of issues. But when COVID hit, it just clearly exacerbated it to a degree that is unconscionable in some communities. This is 2020. But that digital divide is unbelievable in 2020, even with the perspective that some will have more, some will have less. How do we address equity and diversity so that they're cornerstones in our thinking forward, above and beyond this new normal position? My concern is I don't think we educators should be satisfied with just that new normal, because it's in my mind's eye, it's more like retrofitting what was. But we've got to take this to another place, especially in light of what's been revealed through the onset of the pandemic. What are your thoughts?
Well, certainly you bring up, I think, one of the biggest issues that COVID has presented to us. So not only that it disproportionately impacts Black and brown communities, economically disadvantaged communities, from a health standpoint, but also from an education standpoint, because as we try to apply technology solutions, virtual learning, we realize that many of these communities don't have connectivity. And I know I live in Houston and in Dallas, and the school systems are, saying, okay, kids are going to have to do remote learning, so let's get them computers and let's get them iPads and whatever technology and distribute those, not realizing that in many of those communities, they don't even have the internet connectivity to utilize those technologies. And so it becomes this gap gets exacerbated by just the social economic differences in our communities in this nation. And unfortunately, when you draw that line, it falls squarely on the Black and brown communities. And also, I should say, the Native American communities around the area. And I'll add one other community that we never think about, and that is the rural communities that also have issues around broadband. And so as we think about the solutions that need to be devised, we need to think of them in a concise way. At the National Math and Science Initiative, we are in all of these communities, and when we switched over from face-to-face to now virtual learning, that became very clear to us that we have a bigger problem. So we put all this together and we came up with a solution that we call NIMSY 365. And it's 365 in terms of how we want to deliver our services throughout the year, as opposed to the way in which we were doing episodically in the summer or in the spring for different trainings for teachers, for example, and students. But now that we have technology solutions, how do we apply that across the spectrum of education from the entire academic year and through the summer? And then more importantly, how do we bring that technology to those communities that we serve? And so I'll give you an example. In terms of the digital connectivity, we went immediately to Comcast and said, partner with us in providing internet services and connectivities to these communities. And so we are working with them and a number of other technology and telecom companies to provide interconnectivity for the communities that we serve. And so you may not think about that. Well, let me say it differently. We have to think about that continuous services as we go forward. You mentioned something else, and that was the new normal. I firmly believe there is going to be a new normal. I don't think we're going to return back to the old way in which we are teaching. I think that we need to look at that and where we need to be. Dr. Bloom mentioned that we are going to be, if we're not careful and we don't do this correctly, we're going to end up with an uneducated nation. Maybe say it differently. Let me say it differently so it'll sound nicer. That will end up with a nation that doesn't have enough STEM educated people to not only drive this nation's forward in terms of this innovation, but also to be competitive with other nations around the world. So what we're talking about today is of paramount importance to this country. We have to solve that issue. We have to solve these issues.
Well, Dr. Harris, as we reimagine what that next level of learning and teaching should look like, and understand the diversity of learning modalities, typically we look to is, well, give Jackie Cusack a laptop. and let's just go online with her. But what other ways, what other modalities? You spoke to that a little bit just now, but how else should we be stretching our tools in terms of how to approach teaching and learning in this next phase?
Well, that's a good question, and that question is beyond not only my expertise need to be brought to the table, but the folks on this call. And I would love, when we get to the Q&A, to kind of throw that question out to the experts that are here. But let me just give you one example. We talk about the digital divide, and we talk about it from the standpoint of connectivity. You know, 90 to 95% of the communities, and here when I say communities, students have smartphones, whether they are economically disadvantaged or not. That has sort of been sort of the norm. And how are we using that platform? So even without the internet connectivity, we ought to be thinking about ways in which we can use the connectivity that we know that already exists within those communities. So how do we do that? Can it be used to deliver content? Can it be used to monitor how students are doing, to keep track of them, and when I say keep track of them, not keep track of where they are, but keep track of their learning. So we need to think about the tools that we already have, and then also think about new tools that we can bring to the table to help with this issue. And one last thing I will say, I believe that if we can solve the digital divide issues that we have in this country and in our communities, that it could be a more effective way in which to deliver content, STEM-based content to our students. And right now, there's such a discrepancy, even in the face-to-face instruction that occurs around the country in terms of the have and the have-nots in our public school systems. And so I am, in my moments where I'm thinking about, what can I do and how can I do it differently, I think about how do we get better access to those students.
One of the other evolutions in accountability is the institutions, especially higher ed, we're hearing more and more about that, who are not requiring certain assessments to bolster portfolios for admission, consideration for admission to higher ed. But at the K-12 level, we still remain accountable to our parents, to the taxpayers in our communities, certainly at school board meetings, for how a Jackie Cusack fares on state mandated assessments. What are your thoughts on what accountability should look like nowadays as we go forward?
Well, you're getting me into a really sticky situation here because, accountability and state testing and all that sort of thing has been a big issue. How do we do that so that it's equitable?
Make it tomorrow. Let them know.
Equitable around. I know we've got someone calling in. Oh, there we go. Good. Thanks, Annette. This has always been a challenge since the times of the Bush administration in terms of implementing assessments. Quite frankly, I think we have to have assessments. I think that there should be some level of standards that are required for our students, especially in high school, to graduate from high school. As many leaders of academic institutions around the country know, even when the students come out of quote unquote good schools, there's so much remediation that has to be done in order to prepare them for college level courses. It tells me that even though we're assessing them, we're probably testing the wrong thing. So I'm not, I am not an expert in assessment, but I'll tell you that we're probably testing the wrong thing. And so we need to figure out how to test the right things to enable them to be college ready when they get to college. And speaking of college, I think that it's important for this nation to make sure that we push education and push college education, whether it's a four-year institution or community colleges, and that we do this because it is in our best interest. And then the reason why I mention this, and now I'm going to get into sort of my opinion here and probably get in trouble, I see so many leaders of corporations talk about that we don't need to have we don't need a college educated workforce. And they're advocating only for, occupational or vocational type of training for our students. And you know what I say to that is I say, yes, and. So yeah, I know that not all students are ready for college or even want to go to college. And if they choose to go into a vocational type of training, that's all well and good. But even in that vocational training, if it's not involved around STEM education and technology, it's going to be for naught. But more importantly, I think a nation moves forward when it has a higher educated people in it. It drives innovation, it drives the economy, and I don't know, I think it's just so important. And sometimes when I see these interviews, I always want to ask that question and say, well, where do you send your kids? Are you advocating that they go to vocational school, or you're advocating that they go to college? And I bet you'll find out that they're advocating and they're supporting their students going into college. And in this age, when we talk about systemic racism, I also look at that and going, okay, why are you pushing the Black and brown kids into these areas? So I get a little concerned. So I probably said the wrong thing there, at least politically, but I can tell you that I think that this country, if we are to really move forward, we need to make sure that all our communities, particularly the Black and brown communities, are that we raise the bar, that we ensure that they're going to college, going into those fields that are relevant for the 21st century.
Dr. Harris, in case you didn't notice, you have someone to your right who's in your amen corner. You're getting lots of thumbs up from, I believe it's Dalton. Can we just talk a moment about the school day? It's the configuration of the school day, what time students should report to school, what their experience in terms of time spent in any one content area has been toyed with and tried, and from block scheduling to every other imaginable way to configure it. And certainly the pandemic has caused us to configure it significantly differently. What are your thoughts about, again, moving into the next vision, the new vision of how we look at schools? What should the day look like? I mean, to optimize learning, how should that day be configured, especially when you think about STEM subject areas?
Well, I don't even know if I'm qualified, Jackie, to even talk about that, because I'm not in the schools on a daily basis. I'm not an educator per se, although I teach medical school, business school, but that's entirely different from primary and secondary education. but I can tell you that whatever period of time that we have these students, there needs to be some level of expertise that gets delivered no matter how you deliver that during the school day. But I think technology also allows us to, again, be able to address education throughout the, I'm not going to say 24 hours, but throughout the continuum of opportunities to engage these students. Now, let me see if I can clarify what I just said. If you are doing, say you're advocating for doing a half a day or whatever, 6 hours of school during the day, that still leaves you quite a few hours in which to access these students in one form or the other. We already know that they are, when they're not in class, and those of you who are educators know that if the young folks have a cell phone within their midst, they're distracted. Why not use that opportunity and go back to the cell phone or iPads or computers or at home to continue their learning throughout the day? And I would add throughout the summer, because we know that there is that slide that happens during the summer. So when we think about how technology can be implemented, so it's not, if I'm the superintendent looking at how many days of education that I want to provide the students in a, let's say, 6 or 7 month period of time, quote unquote, the academic year, how can I apply learning throughout the 365 days that I could possibly have access to those students, and how do I effectively do that? I don't know the answer. I just know that there's an opportunity.
Well, that's what we're talking about is about opportunities, and also as we apply that to teacher professional development. This is a time in the K-12 experience when and beyond higher ed settings as well, we're losing staff for any number of reasons, but it clearly has been absolutely increased by the pandemic and its impact on the health and safety of staff and students in our communities. So typically, I know when I was a superintendent, I didn't have a lot of money for professional development. So if we had 2 or 3 days that we could negotiate with our labor groups, that was a good thing. But in a time like this, when we're asking our professional staff to teach using different modalities, and some who didn't get with the program in the first place in terms of becoming more savvy with technology, what are you doing through NJIT to help advance teacher professional development?
Yeah, thank you for the question, and I'll do my little commercial here for NJIT and then talk about what we're doing specifically around COVID. For those of you who are not familiar with the National Math and Science Initiative, we primarily have 3 core programs. A program called CRP, which is College Readiness Program, which is centered around high school for advanced placement. We're one of the largest providers of advanced placement in the country, and our biggest mandate is to make sure that AP is offered in all schools, not just those schools that are in affluent areas. And I'll give an example for New York City. We have a program there called AP for All. And in the past, AP was only in certain affluent boroughs, and now we're in 95% of the schools in the New York City school system. I'd like to see that model in Newark. I'd like to see it in Philadelphia. I'd like to see it in major cities around the nation. And again, it speaks to what I said a few minutes ago, is how do we ensure that our students are prepared for college level courses, and AP is one of the ways in which to do that. And so we're in the middle of that right now. And we're not only in New York, we're across the country. Our program is laying the foundation, which is our solution for professional development around STEM, primary and secondary education. So we go pre-K through 12. And essentially, we train those educators who may not be trained in STEM fields. You know that many of our teachers go to colleges of education, and they get a general education around how to educate students. But then when they go into their school systems, particularly middle school and high school, they may be asked to teach chemistry or biology, and you know, many of them, and I've talked to many of the students, one at least shared with me that when that happens, they get the curriculum, and this one teacher shared with me that I'm one day ahead of the student, meaning that the night before she was ready to teach the course, she would read the teacher manual in order to teach the course the next day. And so what we're doing in our program is making sure that those teachers feel comfortable about teaching those courses that they may be asked to teach. And then also an added value of this program is for those teachers that are involved in STEM teaching in their high schools. Many of them are the only ones in their class, or only ones in their school, and so they're isolated. And so through our professional development courses that we do, and we do a combination of face-to-face and also now virtual, we build this alumni, this community of STEM teachers around the nation, and they can help each other, and that has really been very, very positive around that. Over 65,000, by the way, teachers have gone through those programs. And then our last core program is a program called UTeach. And this is a program that we partnered with the University of Texas, where we take students who are majoring in STEM, and with some additional coursework, they're able to then leave there with their degree and also their ability to teach. And it turns out that our teachers coming out of that UTeach program actually go back to their communities and stay in their communities longer than they would compared to the national average. So we're pretty excited about that. Now, what are we doing for those? So those are our core programs. And by the way, we also work very closely with the Department of Defense and their schools and supporting military families around the nation. But what are we doing for COVID? I mentioned earlier that we had to do this shift from face-to-face or only face-to-face to now doing this blended program. So we're now offering all of those programs that I just talked about virtually. And so now we're able to expand much anticipated. I'll give an example. This year, when we would normally bring a face-to-face for our what we call our summer series, where we bring in thousands of teachers into a location, whether it's New York or Texas or California, for 4 days of training, we did that virtually, and we increased our attendance dramatically by providing professional development services in that way. And so when I see that happening, you know, the light bulb goes off in my head and says, wow, if we can do that for just our programming, what if we can offer that to districts all across the nation? And that's exactly what we're doing in terms of professional development. I mentioned our NIMSI 365. That was the whole concept, is to provide ways in which to do that. And then we also are adding this type of same support for students too. So we are working with partners to provide content and instruction virtually to students to address the issue of the inconsistent learning that's now being talked about amongst some schools as they're trying to do more virtual learning.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I want to, before we go on to our last couple questions, want to remind our participants to please type in your questions in the chat here so that we can get you engaged with Dr. Harris on following up with his responses, get his ideas about your experiences, your thoughts, and find out more about NMSI offerings. So please do that. Dr. Harris, for a superintendent of schools, how would you look at bringing your board on board with a commitment to finance, to support STEM programming? It's typically beyond the recurring prices that figure into school budgets, the salaries and the facility issues, all the maintenance stuff. When you look at curriculum costs, the personnel associated with those costs, you're talking big dollars when you try to do STEM the right way. I remember negotiating, because I was having difficulty trying to hire people who were appropriately certified in the STEM field at the high school level. So what kind of message should we be giving to our boards to help them understand the need to commit to that kind of programming that's going to cost bigger bucks than they're accustomed to?
Yeah, I think it's like anything else, Jackie, you sort of have to lay out, what is what's the value proposition for the community? How would enhancing the level of education, particularly STEM education in that city, in that community, how would it impact the city economically? I think that's how you drive. That's the case that you have to build. And when you think about it, it's not only the board, but it's the politicians. So there's policy issues that you have to address. And those issues are local policies and national policies that you also have to deal with. There are many different stakeholders in some communities, depending on who the large corporations that may be supported by that community, you have to work with them too and bring them along. And so when I think about this, one of the things we've done at NMSI to address your question, how do you make that sell to the community, and particularly those who hold the purse strings? We developed something called the STEM Opportunity Index. And if you Google that, just STEM Opportunity Index, or go to our website, NMSI.org, there is a link to it. And what we've done is we work with a number of stakeholders around the country, including government, private, education institutions, to come up with what we thought were the measures for enabling a good STEM ecosystem in a community. And so when you go to that website, you'll be able to click on a state, let's say the state of New Jersey. And at the high level, it will tell you how the state is faring and around STEM education. And then you can go down to the city level and down to the district level to see how it's faring. And so you can look at the number of qualified teachers that are teaching STEM, and I think we have 114 different parameters that we apply. And so, to your question, one place to start would be maybe to click on, Newark, if you were talking about going to the Newark school system, and see how they're doing. And you'll be able to gather data there, supportive data, that will then tell you that, guess what? Our our school system or our city is not doing well in these areas, and we need to change these areas. So it's about gathering in order to make your case. And so what we do this for is to enable communities to use that exactly for what you're talking about, but we're also using it to identify STEM deserts. And so those are places where there is not adequate STEM education, in which we can then go to those communities and say, you know, you need our programs, or you need to work with our partners that are here. So there use that tool.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. You've heard enough from me. Let's open this up to our colleagues who are participating in this forum. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Weller and Dr. Burr-Alexander to present the questions from our colleagues.
Thank you, and thank you both for a really stimulating morning of dialogue about this. We have a question from a STEM supervisor. How can we participate in the programs that you mentioned, Dr. Harris? Is there some way people can get directly in touch with you?
Mm-hmm. So you can go to our website, and again, that's nms.org for National Math and Science. And my email is Bernard or B. Harris at nms.org. So you can reach me directly there. And on our website has all our programs, gives you the details of all the programs that I just mentioned. And we're always looking for partners.
Great. Another question. What are some key strategies when trying to recruit underrepresented populations to STEM? In my experience, I've found that it's helpful to try to help students by exposing them to experiences with job shadowing, visits to STEM companies, and so forth. Sorry, I have to scroll down. What else would you add to this?
Well, I think that's key. I did a presentation a few weeks ago where we were focused solely on, you know, how do we access Black and Brown students and poor students that are quote unquote economically disadvantaged, and how do we ensure that they have adequate education. And so I used an acronym in which I call EEOC. It's important to addressing that, and that stands for exposure, experience, opportunity, and culture. So many of these communities don't have the exposure, you know, as say a white community would have, particularly if they're poor. Many of these communities don't get the in the society that we're asking them to participate in. Many of these communities and students don't have opportunities to even be exposed to things like, quality education. And I'll use a perfect example. In one of our summer science camps, we would bring students in, and I'll talk about it, I'm sure the same thing happened there at NJIT, but the University of Houston here, where I would engage students that lived 3 blocks from the university, but had never been on campus. So they had never been exposed, they didn't have the experience of being on the university campus. And so, and never took advantage of the opportunity. Why? Because of the community. Their parents was not exposed, and they weren't. And then lastly is culture. We forget how impactful the culture has in learning. And so one of the things that we have been implementing, and I know that you guys have heard of this, is Coach culturally responsive teaching, meaning that students do far better when you take into account their culture, you take into account where they come from and the communities in which they come from. And so if we are able to address all of those things, then we can be more impactful and be able to engage those students in a way that they will participate in the education system and not be turned off by the education system.
Good. I have a question from one of our suburban districts, which have issues, just different issues. A number of students graduating from suburban districts may be well prepared to enter STEM higher education, but they don't tend to choose teaching as a path. Now, I know that NIMSY addresses this. Can you talk a little bit more about how students might be encouraged to join programs like that and how universities can expand the programs?
So as you were talking about the question, one of the things that we believe at NIMSY, and I wholeheartedly believe that education, STEM teachers is a STEM career. So think about that, because we don't normally think about teaching, and especially STEM teaching, as a STEM career. And it's an important one, because if you have a teacher that really knows their subject and that's one of the reasons why we have the You Teach program. If you're a chemistry major and you elect to be a teacher and you teach chemistry, you're probably going to be more engaging than someone who's just been put in the position of having to teach chemistry. And in doing so, the waterfall effect of that would be incredible. You're pushing students into more of the STEM fields, which is what we've been talking about all morning. That then drives, gets them into careers that are higher paying jobs, and then that then drives innovation, and then drives the economy. We'll go on and on and on. And so I think we need to change our perception of STEM teaching. And in doing so, it makes being a STEM teacher more appealing, because now we've raised the level of a consideration for being a teacher. And then, of course, my mom being a teacher, I have to add that we also, if we believe that our teachers are valuable, then we have to pay them like they're valuable. And in many states, we're now seeing that, where the STEM teachers are the higher paid teachers because they realize the importance of it.
That brings up a really interesting point. That question was just put in by our dean of our honors college, the Albert Dorman Honors College. STEM index that you pointed us to a few moments ago is really interesting. It's also technologically very nice and smooth. I've already used it. It could be a very powerful way to shift the political dialogue around funding. You've touched on this, but how does the fractured local funding of public education impact STEM education specifically? Could you expound some on your thoughts on effective strategies to shift that broader funding conversation?
Yeah, I think it is a broader funding conversation, and again, it has to do many times we want to go in, let's say, to a meeting when we're talking about funding certain programs, with this notion that you should fund it because it's the right thing to do. And sometimes that argument works, sometimes it doesn't. But if you have data behind you that says that, number one, we are failing if you happen to be in the skin deserts. And what is the result of that failure? It's going to, and there is a waterfall effect that happens that directly impacts our communities. So it is connecting the dots and highlighting the value proposition as to why you want to invest in that. And then point to, here's what the investment is, and guess what? Here's the return on that investment. And so when you do that, then it becomes hard to argue. They might still argue for political reasons, but it's hard to argue if you can show the value proposition and the positive impact that it will have on the students and eventually to the community in which those students are part of.
I have a follow-up question myself to that, which is you brought up the fact that a number of businesses want specifically trained college graduates or not college graduates, but more narrowly trained. How do you marry that with the financial implications of what we're talking about?
Well, if you talk to most companies, and particularly companies that are involved in technology, they'll tell you that it's been very hard to find qualified candidates, people who have the expertise that they need in this day and age. And so they have an incentive to try to engage the local school systems. And so we have partnerships with large corporations like ExxonMobil and Texas Instruments, and I mentioned Department of Defense. They are looking, even the military need highly trained people who are comfortable with technology, and so that's why they're investing in it. Many of these, particularly large corporations, have philanthropy initiatives within them. And so reaching to them and talking to them about the importance of working on that pipeline that will eventually get to them, many of them will buy that scenario, especially if you use those business terms. I like to hear the return on the investment is that you're going to end up with a highly qualified applicant pool that you're not going to have to do remediation on, and they'll be ready to get into those jobs that you're looking for. So you have to, again, build that case for them. And they are looking for those opportunities, and you have to go out there and ask them.
My own background is in mathematics, and I've made the heretical statement several times that the real reason that students should learn math is not for math's sake, but the fact that it makes them flexible thinkers. I think there's something to be said for selling the community on the fact that if somebody is trained only to screw the bolt and the washer, they're not going to be flexible enough to adapt to new technologies, new challenges. So that's probably part of it too.
And to your point, just as you were talking, I was just thinking about the question that Jackie asked me about assessments and testing the right thing, right? And so if we think about this in terms of capability and less on checking the box of math versus chemistry versus biology, but what are those things that enable an individual to be a lifelong learner? If we approach it that way, then I think we'd be testing differently.
Yeah, good point. This is a question for Dr. Cusack and/or you, Dr. Harris. what are some of the lessons learned that continue to involve underrepresented school-age students in STEM in terms of immersion experiences and activities?
Jackie, I'll let you go first.
Sure. One of the things is to make sure that we keep up. I am Black or brown or underrepresented in some other category. The focus needs to be, however, on helping me understand and acquire the skills so that I can not only meet the high standard, but exceed it. So essentially it's avoiding dumbing down experiences, but figuring out how to help me achieve and succeed. And I have found in my career as a public school educator is that it's very easy for me to say, oh, well, Jackie she's not prepared, she just can't get it. What that points to in my biased mind is that the educator doesn't know how to help Jackie Cusack get it and achieve and become excited by it. So it's designing experiences that engage and give me a sense of satisfaction and success so that I can meet and exceed standards.
And I find that many students don't understand why they have to take certain courses. And so having these experiential experiences allows them to see how it is applicable to their daily lives. And this is certainly true. I've spent a lot of time through a foundation working with elementary and middle school students. And I find that if we're able to engage them there, then we set them on a different trajectory, one that's positive, that they want to learn more, and are not turned off, particularly for minorities and girls.
It also strikes me that our association with you, NJIT's association with you, goes back many years, starting with the Bernard Harris STEM summer camp program. Can you talk just a minute about what that program consisted of and the immersion experiences that it included?
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. It was a program that we created probably 20 years ago now. Started at the University of Houston, where we brought in middle school students, and we made sure that we had half female and half male students, and they would come onto a college campus, and it would be a total immersion. I always make it akin to learning a language. You can take the courses about a certain language, and not until you get totally immersed in it do you really pick up the nuances that you need. And so what we found early on is that we would bring the students in that were had some aptitude in math and science, and we would put them together in a group with other students that had aptitude in math and science, and then we would offer coursework and experiential work and curriculum that allow them to do more hands-on project-based type of learning. And by doing that, they left the 2-week program with a love for science and an incredibly accelerated aptitude toward STEM. So much so that the students in middle school, and this is, by the way, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, rising 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, So much so where they turned on, it lasted through high school, and they graduated from high school and went into college at higher rates because the whole objective was to get them into STEM fields. We took that program from just one college, the University of Houston 20 years ago, to upwards. I think our highest was over 30 universities, including NJIT. And so impacted thousands of students in that way. The other thing I'll mention, for me, it was critically important to have this program in middle school because I saw that as a point in which kids are either turned on or turned off at that point, particularly, again, minorities and girls. And again, we saw that the program was really effective and really engaging and igniting the interest in the STEM fields.
Dr. Harris, let me remind you that we have a wonderful photo op of you with one of the male participants from that summer camp experience, who is now a practicing engineer in the field. He's out of state, but he's a Newarker, and he's very proud to say that he was in that program.
Jackie, you just reminded, it's amazing. We've done the program for so long now. I have doctors, PhDs. I had a note from a young man who just started at Apple and just wanted to let me know that he went through my program, and he of course, he's like 25 or 26 years old, and he sent me a picture of us, and he said, just in case you don't remember who I am. Well, heck, he was 11 years old. So if he walked into my office, I would have no idea. But when you have a program like this and you impact the students and they come back and say thank you, that's all the gas that I need to keep going, doing what I'm doing. And I'm sure many of you feel the same.
In New Jersey's urban districts, we have some terrific STEM-focused schools. And we have a question from the principal of STEM high school in East Orange. What do we need to do to recruit students who have a high level of interest in STEM fields, engage parents in the importance of STEM fields? That's really a key one. Leverage limited resources and convince boards of education that a paradigm shift has to take place in terms of recruitment and retention of qualified teachers. I know you've talked about some of these things, but can you kind of pull it together for us?
So, out of all of that, I have talked about, how do you access, the stakeholders that are going to be part of that, but we haven't talked about, I think, one of the biggest stakeholders today, and that is the parents. And I have to tell you, after being involved in this business for over 30 years now, that is a tough nut to crack. Particularly when we talk about reaching economically disadvantaged groups that have their own struggles in their communities, and sometimes it's working several jobs, sometimes it may be not having jobs. And there are certainly other distractions in these communities that keep them from supporting their students. And so that's a tough one. We've been in many different communities, and I think there have been many ways in which to address that. Other than the PTA, or that's out there. I also think that we can use technology in order to access the parents, because they also have that device that I keep going back and talking about, those smart devices. And so I sometimes think, is there a way in which we can somehow engage the parents using those devices, or create programs? In the summer program, I know we try to engage the parents at the front end and the back end of our programs. But as we think about developing programs that's reaching out in the communities, to figure out how we can engage the parents at the same time that we engage the students, and then use those, even the opportunities with the parents to educate them. And so in some of our programs, we have done just that, you know. So for the residential program, there in some of our universities, there is almost like a 101 for the parents. So they come in and there are certain things that they learn about at the beginning that we instruct them on. And then at the end, there may be a discussion around college readiness for parents. And it's been, you know, different types of programs have been developed to address that. So there is, I don't have a silver bullet. I don't have a magic wand here, only that we need to think about how we engage the parents as we create these programs.
When I was a school principal, I found that I got the greatest parent turnout when they were coming to see their children, loosely speaking, perform, which might be a math and science night or a science fair, not necessarily a musical performance or what we classically think of. So I think your point is well taken, that if you can hook them, then you can reel them in. There's a question that we received not in the public chat, and when you hear it, I think you'll understand why. I wish to be anonymous because my premise isn't very complimentary. I'm new in my district and haven't found many people who share my desire to be forward thinking. How can I go about finding such people and motivating them to work with me?
Wow, yeah. I think that is certainly not a, you're not alone in that. I think there are many of us probably on this call just sitting right now that have to deal with that. And so finding opportunities in forums like this of like-minded people that you can come and share deals with, that you can complain around, that you can ask those questions of, you know, what did you do in this situation? I mentioned a few minutes ago that when we do our programs, we create a community of those educators. And so finding those communities, I think, can help. We have a partnership group where we go and we bring together certain partners to address certain issues. I mentioned the STEM Opportunity Index was a result of one of those partnerships where we brought together about 50 different organizations around this notion about, you know, how do we identify STEM deserts, and then what are the components that enable STEM education in a community or in a school district. And just having, you know, that type of group coming together resulted in what I think is a pretty interesting technology.
I would also add that.
May
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
add to that?
Sure.
To the anonymous writer, on top of everything that's been said, I would tag the word success. Get results. Get results. How do you get them? You're an educator working with your students. Help those students succeed. Help them become successful. That says everything. You can talk all you want. You can shout, you can rant and rave and complain, but when you get successful outcomes through your students, that's where you separate the women from the girls and the boys from the men, and whatever characteristics you want to use as the opposites there. But outcomes.
And Jackie, now that's a very good point, and I will add to we as human beings always look for external validation. And in this case, you know, yes, you want that, you want to be recognized, but what about the validation that comes from the impact that you have on your students, to Jackie's point? And use that as your primary motivation, right? And then build from there. Because otherwise, if you're only looking for that external validation and you don't get it, it can be really disconcerting and demoralizing. And I think what you really want is to have those students turn their lives around, thinking differently than when you engage them. And to me, that is greatest reward.
And when kids go home talking excitedly about subject matter, that tends to change hearts and minds also. I would like to point out there's one community group that I don't believe we've mentioned that I have found to be key, and that's realtors. When school districts are strong, real estate values tend to rise. Realtors make more money themselves. And so if you can engage realtors in a community, you can often reap benefits from that, even if you don't have major corporations to turn to. I believe that's all of our questions. Let me double check. Oh, no, sorry. We have one more, and then we'd like to have some closing thoughts from you if you wish. How can we help shift culture? Culture being the hardest thing to shift. In particular, helping families understand the connection between commitment to schoolwork and future success, particularly when they have to potentially weigh that against family needs.
It's always a balancing act, isn't it? Especially for our parents, as we talked about before. If they're conscientious, they have to take care of themselves. They have to take care of their families. We know that many of our young people don't have whole families in the sense of a traditional family, and maybe a one parent home. And so there's a lot of juggling and things like that that has to be. At least for, you know, I'll speak personally from my background. I came from a broken home. I came from a home that dealt with issues of being poor. And every time I say those words, I didn't say that when my mom was alive that we were poor, because we didn't know we were poor, but we were. And came from, as I mentioned, broken home, divorced early on, had to deal with typical issues that many of us, the students in which you serve, have to deal with. And I just always reflect back on you know, what was my mother thinking, you know, this 28-year-old when this happened, and eventually having to take care of 3 kids. And I think the driving force was that she wanted us to be in an environment that allowed us to accomplish our dream, to have a dream, number one. And her motivation was to get us out of an environment that was so restrictive that it might have held us back as a human being, with the unlimited potential that eventually she saw in all of her kids. Same motivation that drives parents. That should be the same motivation that drives them to making sure that their students, their kids, their children have an education that's going to enable them to do well and to contribute to take care of themselves and to take care of the community, and thereby engaging the nation. So I don't know if that exactly addressed the question, but because I think it does really depend on what those internal motivations are But I thought what I would do is share with you at least an example of one parent that had similar things to deal with and how she dealt with them.
And sometimes it's a matter of overcoming a culture of hopelessness.
It is.
Could you, before you give us some closing remarks, could you give us the email address again that you mentioned earlier? People weren't fast enough to write it down.
Okay. The website is nms.org, so nationalmathandscience.org. And my email address is bharris@nms.org.
Okay. Thank you to all the participants who asked us questions today and for your presence here. I would like to point out that NJIT, the Center for Pre-College Programs, also has a number of programs. If you go to our website, which is njit.edu/pre-college, one word, you can view everything from student-focused programs to development for staff to programs for families, parents and or other family members and children to engage in together. Dr. Harris, it's been a pleasure, as it always is, to have you with us and learn from you. Would you share some closing remarks with us?
What can I say that I haven't already said? Passion in this almost 2 hours of being with you, except for to say thank you. I appreciate that. A couple of days ago, I got a briefing from our research and development team on the effectiveness of our program, and we're pretty excited as to the long-term effect of the programs that I just mentioned to you. But one thing stood out as we were comparing how our program had done. We were comparing it with the nation. And so we were looking at graduation rates, how we compared to graduation. We were looking at how our students fared with what was, the students nationally, on the national average, in terms of the fields in which they went into. And as I was looking at those numbers, I was excited because in many cases our students did twice as good as the national figures. But then when you look at the national figures, they were pretty darn low. Graduation rates, the return into the STEM fields, and I said to myself, boy, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go in this country. And so that was the first message. The other that was part of that data dump was the demographics of our teaching force in our public schools. And you guys probably know this, that only 17%, I think 17% of the educators in our public schools are minorities. So very few Hispanic teachers, very few Black and brown teachers out there, but yet the population is getting more and more colorful, if I put it that way. And this nation is browning, as some people have said. We talked about the importance of being able to teach those students. And it's not only important for the Black and brown community and the economically disadvantaged communities out there in all the forms and fashion, but because of where we're going demographically as a country, if we don't do this work, we all will lose. That's the deal. And so I remember talking to a board many years ago, and the board was mostly white guys. And I said, guys, you need to wake up. Because even if you don't like what I'm saying, this is about self-preservation. It's about self-preservation. If you want this country to be at this level and remain that level and to have that ingenuity and have that innovation, you've got to be a part of that solution. And so I think that's the message that we need to convey when we are dealing with these struggles, especially during this time of the two pandemics. Thank you very much. I really appreciate everyone hanging in there. Love those triple claps.
Dr. Cusack?
Thank you, Dr. Harris, Barbara, Lavelle, Suzanne, Martha, and our colleagues in the field and on campus. You just made it a very stimulating Thursday morning for me, and it's always wonderful. It's always a treat. I will tease him and embarrass him by saying what I've said in public before. Clearly, Dr. Harris has walked many miles in space, but here at CPCP, we think he walks on water. So thank you all. Stay tuned for other offerings that we will announce as the year unfolds, and by no means miss our next STEM forum. God bless. Stay safe.